Okay, so welcome everyone. This is a webinar on the lunar nodes in Taurus and Scorpio. I'm Gary O'Toole. I'm a Vedic or Indian astrologer, and you can find me at timelineastrology.com. And let's start off as we mean to go on, shall we? We're talking about the nodes, and sometimes they can be inappropriate. A friend of mine who studies astrology refers to these symbols in quite a X-rated way, just to help you remember which is which. So the north node of the moon is this one pointing upwards, and the south node of the moon is this one pointing downwards. So the upwards, I'll explain astronomically what that means. And the downwards show this kind of journey of the soul, really, from life to life, this sense of moving through life, moving forward, moving upwards, that's the north node, and moving from something, from the past, the south node, the downward moving node. So that's basically what they are, but let me go through them one by one, and that hopefully will make more sense when I show you the slides. So a bit about their myth and meaning. I'll show you the calculations in a minute, but this is just fascinating for me and for anyone who follows astrology when you see what's happening in the news, particularly with Donald Trump. And I'll tell you more about that in a while when we look at the actual divisions of the signs. So we're talking today about Taurus and Scorpio, but there are lunar divisions of those signs. And the two lunar divisions that are particularly activated right now with the nodes transiting them are Jeshta and Mrigashirsha. And these are two, well, it's just fascinating. As soon as they moved into these signs, it highlighted this story again. So you might be familiar with this story, this churning of the oceans. And Indra, the king, the chief of the gods, who rules Jeshta, lost his kingdom again. He's always losing his kingdom, right? This is the thing with Indra. He wants to be in control all the time and in power, but he's always losing it. What's fascinating is that Donald Trump has his moon in Jeshta, where the south node is right now, exact degree. So, and he has Ketu there anyway, the south node. So he was born on a full moon, a total lunar eclipse. So he is this kind of, Indra type of character. Like he is the chief, So, but the problem with the chief is that he keeps losing power, and he needs what's opposite Jeshta in Mrigashirsha to stay in power, which is the soma, which is the nectar of immortality. And this story of churning the oceans of milk to obtain these are the pots here of Amrita, the immortal nectar, is all about, well, literally it's playing out. I mean, I don't know if you just realize how interesting this is, but it's literally playing out in the news as we see in a modern context. This is the ancient mythological story. But Donald Trump, as soon as the nodes went into these signs, he was given just this cocktail of drugs to get rid of the virus. So the asuras, you could say, are the virus. These are the demons here on one side, and the gods here on the other side needed the demons to churn the oceans to create the Amrita. Now, that basically means, with lots of different meanings behind it, in terms of this churning that can go on in our minds, how we churn out, the positive and negatives of a situation before we get some insight. That's maybe one interpretation. It's my interpretation anyway. But another interpretation could be literally the virus that we actually, or whatever poison, we actually need a little bit of the virus. So the gods needed the demons to get the cure, the Amrita, i.e. the vaccine. So it's no coincidence that while these nodes are transiting these two signs, the Indra sign and the Soma sign, the chief of the gods and the nectar, that we're now churning it out. And they're literally churning it out. They're now anticipating that the vaccine will be ready for distribution by the end of the year. Okay, and I live in a country that Pfizer, the big company that are going to churn it out first, have a big plant here, and so they're like ready to vaccinate everyone in Ireland very quickly by the new year. So this is going to happen quite quickly, I feel, in the new year. So it's just fascinating that this story is literally this mythological ancient story is playing out in real time with the nodes now in these two signs. So the other part of that story, though, is that the demon Swarbanu, this is Swarbanu here in the middle, getting his head cut off. And this is just, again, a story, another myth to explain how these operate. But the demon Swarbanu sat between the sun and the moon. This is the sun here, the orange color, and then the moon here, the pale blue. And to drink of the immortal nectar, you can see that he's had a taste of it, the Amrita. So he gets the immortal nectar, the demon. And this is also fascinating because this tells the story of how viruses, this is literally telling the story of a virus, how viruses can get into a cell. So this demon got in between the sun and moon and disguised himself so they didn't know it was a demon. And then Vishnu in this story disguised himself as Mohini and saw this deceit because he's Vishnu, so he could see. And when he saw him drinking the immortal nectar, he threw his discus and cut off his head, but he had already drank the immortal nectar, so he became immortal. So the head is the north node of the moon in this story, and the headless body is Ketu, the south node. And so they're immortal. So viruses are always have been with us. They always will be. We've lived with them forever. And in fact, if you read enough about them, you'll see that actually we need them also to stay alive. So there's that side of it too. So viruses on the one hand kill us, and on the other hand, we need them to stay alive. So it's just fascinating when you look at it in terms of these stories. So that tells us a little bit about the viruses, but it also tells a little bit about our own kind of demonic nature and how we have this head part of us that wants. He, wanted to drink the immortal nectar, so he wanted to gobble it up. So there's a part of us that really wants and thirsts for life. That's the north node called Rahu, Rahu in Indian astrology. And then the south node, Ketu, Ketu, is more willing to give up, is more willing to let go. So there's a more spiritualizing force really in, well, both of them, but Ketu is more obviously spiritualizing because we're ready to renunciate. Whereas Rahu has to go through something, experience something, and have its fill before it's ready. We're ready to give up. So let me move on and talk about them individually. So Rahu, there's usually a dash. I should have put a dash over the A here, and because it actually is good to pronounce it properly, it's called Rahu. So you really pronounce the A, Rahu. And even the sound Ra is quite like a bounding sound, like it's quite a strength. It's a lot of strength in it, Rahu. So this is the ascending lunar node, and it propels us forward for better or worse. So sometimes we can, when we're striving and going for something or getting the drug or getting the whatever, we don't think, we just go, right? So the story of Donald Trump in our modern myth, literally playing out on our TV screens, is like he's not thinking of the consequences. He just wants the Amrita. He just wants the drug. He wants the immortality. He wants to stay in power. So he just takes it regardless. Just take them all. So this is the kind of thing with Rahu. There's always a price to pay with Rahu. It might give you what you want, but it's always tinged with something. So you might regret getting like that saying, be careful what you wish for applies here. So we always get what we want eventually if we're obsessive enough about it, which is what Rahu is all about. But there's a price. So we need to be mindful of that. The other side of the equation then is Ketu, the descending node, which points us back, whether we can see it or not. Now this is fascinating because my slide is not bringing up his picture. So that's interesting. Maybe that's an omen. But basically, let me see if I can click back and forward again and it'll come up hopefully this time. Nope, it doesn't want to come up. You can't see it, no? There's no image there, no?
No.
Oh, okay, interesting. Okay, so I did have an image of Ketu, but it doesn't want to show now. Literally, that's the point I'm making here. Whether we can see it or not, that's the thing. So obviously we can't see it usually because the nodes are not visible. They're not planets, they're shadows. And so, but particularly Ketu, we on one hand want to give that thing up, but we might not necessarily, be conscious of that. We might convince ourselves that we really want that thing or whatever it might be, that experience. But when Ketu comes, we really want to give it up. What I see oftentimes though in people's charts, it's not necessarily that obviously, giving things up and all of that. It could be that they feel a bit dissatisfied with the thing or the person, if it's a person, and they want to go deeper. So if they in fact actually deepen their connection with that thing or that person, it becomes a richer experience. In fact, that's something I've just noticed. Anyway, let me go back. Oh, I think there's actually something happening with the slides. That's why. Let me just pause. Okay, so I just paused it for a second just to bring up I'm doing this on online presentation thing, so that's why it might pause for a minute. So that's the image of K2. You can see a fish there, which is very apt here because the Vishnu avatar for K2 is the fish. So anyway, this is Ketu. He doesn't have a head. So it's the headless part of us. It's the non-thinking, irrational, impulsive part of us. Whereas Rahu may be overthinking and obsessing. So there's the two. So this is how they're calculated. A very simple calculation here. If you want to see as a map, you have the Earth and you have the ecliptic here. The yellow line is the sun's path. And then you have the moon moving north of the ecliptic and then south. So when it's moving north, ascending, it's the north node. This is Rahu. And when it's moving south, descending, it's Ketu. And they're opposite, exactly opposite in the zodiac. So in the birth chart. So you can't see them, of course, because they're shadows, they're eclipses. You can only see an eclipse when there's an eclipse, and they happen every 6 months. And we're going to start the eclipses very soon by the end of November 30th. And that will be followed on December 14th by a total solar eclipse. So we have November 30th, a partial lunar, and then December 14th, a total solar. That's going to really kick things off, and the themes that I'm going to mention here about Taurus and Scorpio. But this is one thing about not being able to see them, because obviously we can only see a very small range of visible light here. And within that range, of course, is a spectrum that we could see Rahu Ketu representing. Outside of that, you could see that infrared on one side and ultraviolet on the other, and they relate to Rahu Ketu. So ultraviolet light would be related to Rahu. This is just another fascinating correlation, so I'm just bringing this up. And infrared would be Ketu. Now, what's fascinating about this is that sunlight is mostly infrared. It's 51%. And then there's the visible light, and there's only 2% of UV rays. So again, think about Rahu as a head. So if you get your head cut off, it's just a small head. And then you have the body, which is Ketu. And the fact of the matter is that if you've ever delved into red light therapy, which I love, I have my red lights at home. Red light is very therapeutic. So, you can, you need to dose it properly and all of that, but it's not damaging like UV light. You need very small amount of UV light, perhaps. But if you get too much UV light, it's very dangerous. So that's the kind of correlation between Rahu Ketu. Rahu is very dangerous. It's the most malefic in Indian astrology. Second comes Saturn. Most people think Saturn is the most malefic, but it's Rahu, then Saturn, then Mars. So Ketu is not coming in anywhere there. Because Ketu actually offers a lot of spiritual insight and spiritual upliftment. It is also malefic. It's cruel in a sense, but there's a lot of benefit. And this example of getting red light therapy and all the benefits of red light therapy, especially if you don't get sun, because if you literally don't get enough light and you're indoors a lot, red light therapy is a must really to counteract that. So anyway, that's just a point I wanted to make about them. So historically, they've now come back into Taurus and Scorpio. They do that every 18 and a half years. And so we're seeing repeating themes. Of course, everything's different, even though the patterns are similar, different faces, different places. but there's similar themes. So let's go through other times that they were here. And so if I go back to 2003, you might remember the Iraq War. And you're thinking, what in the hell does that got to do with Taurus and Scorpio and the nodes? Well, let me give it to you in a few words. One sentence would sum it up. And that is Taurus and Scorpio and the nodes' involvement would be all about the business of war. Taurus and Scorpio. The business, Taurus, of war, Scorpio. So whatever you believe about what happened with the Iraq War, the point is that a lot of money was made in the arms industry and all of that. And so the correlation I'm also bringing up here, which is this image here, and you might remember 2003, again, remember the nodes were in Taurus and Scorpio. Saddam Hussein was, and this is how they phrased it, rooted out from his hiding place. I'm bringing that up now specifically because it's important in terms of what's going on now with what we need to root out now, which is the virus. It's not a war like it was in 2003. It is a war on the virus, though. So another thing that happened back then was the Genome Project. This is just an image of the mapping of the genome. So let me just get my dates right, make sure I have them. So the Genome Project, yeah, that was 2003 also. And that was the time which they finished. I mean, it started long before, but it was finished in 2003. They mapped 99% of the entire genome, the human genome. And why that's relevant, of course, in terms of what's happening now with the virus is important because we know now that when Rahu, Ketu move into these signs, so we're thinking more about Ketu and Scorpio in particular, and Scorpio being all about research. This year and a half is going to bring out a lot of in-depth research and in terms of the virus. So who knows? It might be even like not just dealing with this virus. It could be like ways of dealing with other viruses too. Because the last time, let me just get my dates right. I just want to make sure that the time before then in 1983, when again Rahu and Ketu were in Taurus and Scorpio, Ketu and Scorpio, that's when they discovered how this is HIV. That's when they discovered how HIV was transmitted as soon as Ketu went into Scorpio. So there was a lot of fear around it before then, which is what we experienced earlier this year with Rahu, Ketu in the previous signs. But as soon as they move into Rahu, into Taurus and Scorpio, things stabilize somewhat because at least now you get to understand how it's spread, right? So obviously there's a lot of fear with HIV and they didn't know how it spread. So that's also relevant in terms of what's happening today in terms of dealing with this virus. However, there are other things to be aware of during Rahu Ketu's transit in these signs because they're very strong in these signs. They're seen actually as exalted at their strongest. And so although they can create great insights and advancements and research and all of that, it can also, particularly in terms of Ketu, think of a headless being, this sense of not thinking things through, maybe not planning things, or actually just not knowing because we can't see. And this is something that couldn't have been seen. They didn't know about it at liftoff. This was the Challenger disaster. Let me get the dates right on this one as well. I don't have it to hand right now, but basically what happened was during liftoff, a piece of foam broke loose and hit the wing, and they didn't see the damage on liftoff. So the end was in the beginning, really, during the liftoff. And when it was, obviously, you know what happened there. It exploded. So anyway, that's a tragedy. And this is one of the things that Ketu can also represent, this sense of loss, and accidents is another big thing about Ketu. Now, in terms of what's happening in our modern day, it's like with the virus, and we can see it now that they're rushing things through with the vaccine, and there are going to be repercussions of that. If you don't think long and hard enough about things, you can make mistakes, basically, and there could be some problems with that. Whatever good it might do, there could also be challenges. So I'm just having to highlight that as well. Okay, so let's move on to the next. If we go back to that time as well in the early 80s, of course, there was Band-Aid. This is another person who has very significant placements. Bob Geldof. He has Jeshta rising, the very end of Scorpio, and his moon is in Anuradha in Scorpio, so a lot of Scorpio. So Ketu is in Scorpio in 1983, 1984, and at that time, at Christmas time, they released a single, Do They Know It's Christmas? Because the other thing about Rahu, Ketu, and Taurus Scorpio is all about resources. Taurus and Scorpio is all about wealth or lack thereof. So that the famine in Ethiopia, of course, and people coming together and raising funds and singing, that's Taurus is the voice, to alleviate what was going on in Africa. So, and just because personally as well, it's just fascinating to see how Bob Geldof personally was willing to forego his own needs, which is what Ketu is all about too, let go of his own personal needs, Ketu transiting his first house and his moon sign in order to help others. That's another indication here. Another thing, though, is money, of course, literally, like I said, so it's resources and money. And so one of the things that happened during Rahu Ketu's transit previously is that the euro came into circulation. So the other thing about money is that it changes when the nodes are there. So this is obviously going to happen again. We're going to go through a lot of changes in the economy. I'm not saying that it'll be a new currency, but it could be having to go or maybe think more about online shopping and all of that. So there's always changes, though. And this rationing thing, of course, also because of this sense of people hoarding, because Rahu in Taurus can show people hoarding, which is another possibility. So that's something else I thought I'd bring up. So I'm going to break it down now into the lunar mansions and just give you a sense of, how it's going to play out sort of in each period, because each lunar mansion, which divides up the signs Taurus and Scorpio, there are three of them. It does sort of, give a different flavor, certainly. But the overall themes are going to continue throughout this whole year and a half while they're there. So the first one is what we're experiencing right now. And I mentioned it already, and how Donald Trump is literally playing out this myth in real time for us with Jeshta and Mrigashirsha. So Ketu's in Jeshta, Rahu is in Mrigashirsha. The symbol of Mrigashirsha, it's literally a deer head. That's what that word means. And Jeshta means elder or eldest. And it's again, Jeshta is all about Indra, the chief of the gods. So he's the elder, he's the eldest, he's in control, he wants to stay in control, and he'll do anything to stay in power. And I'm going to, put that out there, that Donald Trump is willing to do anything to stay in power. And that's why I believe that he can actually stay in power, despite what the polls are saying. He might not stay in power, but he's going to do his darndest to stay in power. He'll do anything. And this is what these signs represent. So, and it's just interesting to see how these myths play out, how these particular traits play out in these signs. So Ketu in Jeshta is, it's definitely great for research and all of those things I mentioned, and for uprooting this virus and, maybe taking it out of its hiding place and zapping it, okay, maybe that's a bit glib, but definitely there's going to be some advancements in the next year and a half. Rahu and Mrigashirsha, again, that's very much about the Amrita, the immortal nectar. It's ruled by the god Soma, Mrigashirsha. So it's all about getting the immortal nectar, the drug, the whatever. And it might not necessarily be drugs either. It could be also just a supplement that you take, to stay healthy. That's another indication. If you take lots of supplements, that's also indicated here. And maybe I probably would be guilty of this a little bit, of hoarding supplements. If you open up one of my cabinets, it's kind of like, it looks like a health shop. So it's like, this is what Mrigashirsha is all about. It's all about the Amrita. And you can't really stay in control, which is what Jeshta is all about, and staying in power and feeling powerful, unless you have something. And that's why Indra in myth was always taking Soma. He was always drunk on Soma. That's the myth. So these transits continue until January anyway. Rahu will stay in Mrigashirsha. But until June next year, Ketu will be in Jeshta. So really until next summer. And this is kind of like the timeline that they're already referring to here in Ireland anyway. Our one of our leaders even just today spoke about his, because they don't normally say this until they get the go ahead from WHO and whoever the advisors are. But today they've just stated that they do see a timeline in the new year of the vaccine rollout, literally in the first quarter of the year. So it's kind of falling in line with the timeline for this. So then they move. So it's not concurrent because of the way they're lined up in each sign. They're staying within this whole period, all of this rest of this year, all of next year, and into April to 2022. But it's not concurrent because of the way these are divided up. So Anuradha is the next one for Ketu, but it doesn't go into Anuradha until June, whereas Rahu has moved into Rohini in January until October. So these two are a lot more about pleasure seeking in many ways and comforts. And this is where maybe the hoarding might come in. Now I'm thinking of it in terms of other ways that people might be hoarding in, in terms of the cure or remedies, or, countries hoarding the vaccine, and then getting into the money thing again, because when you look at the previous transits of these signs, there was all these, it's always comes down to money with Taurus and Scorpio, you see. So there can be a lot of, let's face it, it's big pharma, okay? And basically it's going to be like whatever company pushes it out first is going to make billions. I don't know, maybe more trillions, I don't know. So it's very much about making money and hoarding and all of that. But personally for Zol, it'll be very much about, wanting to enjoy yourselves again as well. And so there might be an overindulgence going on here as well next summer onwards. Who knows? Let's see what happens there. So then the final lunar mansions then are sharper in nature. The previous ones are a lot softer, Rohini and Anuradha. But by February 2022, so it's a bit later, Ketu moves into Vishaka. And then, but by the end of next year, October 2021 until April, so they both move through Taurus and Scorpio until April 2022. That very end, that tail end, is particularly, I suppose, has a sting in its tail, if we put it that way. Ketu has a bit of a sting in its tail anyway. Now, historically, that could show, and has shown, wars and things like that and fighting. But again, we're having to take it in modern context, and what's happening right now is literally the virus. So this war on the virus. So that actually could be a positive thing in terms of ridding it, ourselves of it, finally, perhaps. So let's just look at the eclipses now in Taurus and Scorpio for this next couple of years, because they're all, and let's just look at the ones that are happening in Taurus and Scorpio. So here they are. So like I said, we're starting one very soon on November 30th in Taurus at 15 degrees. So that is in the sign Rohini, I mentioned. And it's a very soft and pleasurable and comforting sign. And Rahu and the eclipse and Rahu subsequently moving into Rohini in the new year, this shows this kind of pleasure-seeking vibe going on next year for sure. Now, there's a lot of dark corners that I could go down and avenues I could go down with this as well, because other things it could show would be, and I've seen reports about this, and more people having to work in the sex industry. That's another possibility with Rahu in Rohini. Rohini is a very sexual sign, basically. So sex and money and all these things will be very relevant. So obviously the economy, the way we spend, what we spend money on, all these things will be very relevant from next year because of this. Then there's a total solar eclipse at 28 degrees of Scorpio. This is exactly where Donald Trump's moon is. And this is why I had predicted previously that there's some, health issues for him. We've seen that he has had health issues already, but I still feel like there's some issues there with Donald Trump. That occurs on December 14th. This solar eclipse has already been triggered though, and has been since the end of September, as soon as Ketu moved into Scorpio. So don't always think that something happens on the day of an eclipse. It's usually not the case. It's usually the case that a planet has to transit the degree before or after the eclipse. So we've already had a transit here, and that's why we've seen Donald Trump get the virus. And I've talked about that already. But anyway, don't expect the day itself, so December 14th, to throw up anything. Having said that, it is a new moon, and it's a solar eclipse, and it's a total solar eclipse, and it's at 28 degrees of Scorpio. So there could be some insights here, something revealed. A new moon, at any rate, is a new beginning and a new insight and a new a month. But this is like a new year in a way, starting already in many ways. When we think about the last eclipse in December, that started the virus, right? In December 2019, that was the beginning of the virus. So now we're kind of coming around again to December again, and this eclipse could show some advancements. Now, one of the things I have said before, and I really hope I'm wrong about this, is that although there could be advancements and better research and treatments and cures, the other possibility of Jeshta always, and Scorpio in general, and Ketu in this sign could be, I just hesitate to say it, but I have to say it, I guess, just to put it out there. It could also show what's the word? When a virus mutates. There could be some mutations going on. Well, I mean, there's likely to be mutations. So, I mean, I guess, no, that's nothing new. That's what viruses do. Viruses want to stay alive just as much as we do. So it's like, think about Rahu Ketu. They really want to stay alive. They don't want to be rooted out. Even though at the same time, they're not alive, which is the other fascinating thing about viruses, because Rahu Ketu, again, they're demons. They're like shadowy. Viruses are not living entities, right? They have to hijack a cell to stay alive. Rahu Ketu in a chart don't operate on their own. They have to hijack planets and express themselves through the planets. And they express themselves through the planets whose signs they're transiting. So remember, Rahu is in Taurus. So Venus themes are highlighted for the next year and a half. Pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. Economy, sex, all of that. Cures, all of that is highlighted. And then Scorpio, which is Ketu, is very much about secrets and hidden things and research and uprooting things. And Mars is about attacking things. So this is great in many ways. This is, although there are dark sides to it too, like I mentioned, in many ways, this is a great time in terms of the advancements here. So next year, then we have more eclipses. We have a total lunar at 11 degrees of Scorpio in Anuradha. So let me just, so that's on May 26th next year. And then we have an annular, so it looks like it has a ring around it. It's like a total solar eclipse, but it's not completely total because of the distance of the moon. So that's at 25 degrees Taurus. This is Mrigashirsha. So that would be June next year, which will be interesting in terms of, again, cures and vaccines and treatments, because again, this is what Mrigashirsha is all about. And the solar eclipses, you can say, do have an impact for longer. The lunar eclipses have a more immediate impact. So we're maybe not paying as much attention to the lunar eclipses as we are the solar. So again, this December solar is a big one. And then next summer in June is a big one. I think that could be a real turning point in June. There's another partial then lunar on the 2nd or 2 degrees of Taurus, November 19th next year. And there's another total solar at 18 degrees of Scorpio, again, Jeshta, next December. So this December and next December, total solar eclipses in Jeshta. So that is something definitely being rooted out, and this war on the virus, taking leaps and bounds this December and next December. By next December, I'm sure that we're going to be in a very different place. And then there's a total lunar eclipse at 1 degree of Scorpio in Vishaka, the following May 2022. And at that stage, the nodes have moved out of Taurus and Scorpio. So I'll quickly go through each sign by sign. And for those that are here, I'll answer any questions if you have any. Let's start with Aries. Now, I usually, would consider rising sign first and then moon sign second, and then anything else you have that you know. So ideally, if you don't know your Indian chart, your Vedic chart, perhaps, calculate it, get it calculated somewhere, go to a couple of resources, make sure you know your exact rising sign or moon sign. So think rising sign first, then moon sign. So with the nodes in Taurus and Scorpio, the second and eighth sign, it's all about security. And this is the general theme anyway for the world, because Aries is the first natural sign of the zodiac. So when we talk general themes, we're talking about Aries. So, but for Aries, it's not general, it's very personal, and it's all about money. Because again, it's the second and eighth sign. So it's all about resources and money for Aries. So security. So on the left-hand side, it's more about Rahu and what these individuals will want more of. And on the right-hand side, it's all about Ketu and what they might want to let go of or might want to deal with more in more depth. So security through resources and wealth, getting more and more whatever. Sensual indulgence also, and also that's not necessarily a bad thing. It could be just wanting to stay present, because one of the problems with Rahu Ketu is that Rahu especially is that it really does not want to be in the present. It destroys Rahu being in the present. So if there's one way you want to get rid of Rahu very quickly, just be in the moment, basically. And so sensual pleasure is one way. Using the senses is one way of being in the moment. So there's a positive thing there too, of course. But the possibility, of course, with Rahu in Taurus in the second is that there's some may overindulge. And then Ketu in Scorpio in the eighth sign is all about dealing with uncertainty and change, as well as a spiritual perspective. So the reason why somebody with Aries rising or moon sign might want to indulge a bit more, might want to eat that bit more of whatever, or drink more of whatever, and accumulate more wealth or whatever. And they'll want it, that might not necessarily get it, because Rahu just gives you the want. That's the only guarantee that Rahu is that it would just give you the want for that thing. It doesn't necessarily guarantee that you get it. And even if you do get it, that it will actually satisfy you. This is the problem with Rahu. But the want will be there because of this vulnerability of Ketu in the eighth. So that's Aries. Taurus itself, we're going to go obviously through a lot of personal changes. If you have Taurus rising or moon sign, so a lot of changes for Taurus. And Rahu tends to, when it's transiting your rising sign, as it has done for Gemini very recently, it tends to ask a lot of you. And so you ask a lot of yourself. It really pushes you to the forefront. It really asks you to be something different, change something up. That could be literal physical changes as well, but certainly changing who you are in terms of how you express yourself. The other side of that, of course, is that if you're going through very personal changes, there's a tendency to then not think about other people as much, because you're focused on you, right? If Rahu's in the first, you might not be thinking about other people with Ketu in the seventh. So the significant other or others in general might be rejected or feel rejected, even if you don't do it very consciously. So Taurus rising or moon sign, be mindful of that. That kind of sense of rejecting others. For Gemini, they've had Rahu move through their sign, so they're getting a bit of relief now because it asked a lot of them. And now it's a bit more of retreat and surrender for Gemini. So they might want to slip back into the background a little bit during the next year and a half. They might want to go on some long distance travel or retreat. And that's a bit of wanting to kind of check out in a way. And because Ketu in the sixth can show that they maybe don't want to deal with the daily grind. But what Ketu in the sixth is very good for is improving their health. One of the best things about Ketu in the sixth in Scorpio for Gemini rising or moon sign would be about improving health. And so not to, avoid the things that must be done as while you may want to, go somewhere and enjoy a retreat. There's nothing wrong with that. But again, with the nodes, it's always about balance. And we tend to lose the balance when the nodes are in signs. And so we tend to, and I keep saying tend to because it's not for everybody, but most people will gear themselves towards Rahu and reject Ketu. So Taurus is on the agenda, in other words, for the next year and a half. And Scorpio, we want to remove that or reject it, which again, in terms of the virus, is a good thing because we're getting rid of a virus, right? So that's a good thing in terms of the virus. But in terms of our personal lives, we might reject that thing on some level. for the Taurus thing. So for Cancer, where they're geared to more so is earnings, friendships, gains, maybe networking a bit more, maybe wanting to get out more. And these days, maybe it's more online. Associations and groups are definitely going to be a big thing for them, and earning more possibly as well. But what is the need there? Why is that there? Because there might be a rejection of what, their children and creativity. Maybe a child leaves home, for example. They want to like find some new friends, find something new to do. Or if they finished a creative project, or they're just finished with it and they don't want to deal with it anymore, and they might want to just join other people's creative as indulgences and ideas, and kind of think bigger. The great thing about the 11th house, of course, is that it gives us more a connection to other people, and we think bigger, and it's a bigger worldview. Whereas the 5th sign transit is more about our own creativity, our own thought processes, and it kind of is very personal, the 5th sign. So again, I mentioned it about Ketu. The best way to approach it is to deepen that thing. So instead of rejecting something or someone, deepen your relationship to your children, if that is Cancer for you, rising or moon sign, or deepen your love relationship, because the 5th sign is all about romance. So for Leo, this is all about promotion, success, career. It's all about wanting promotion, success, career. Donald Trump has Leo rising. So a lot of promotion, success, changes though at work. So there's big changes going on for Leos at work and at home, because Ketu in the 4th sign of home, which shows a need for home improvements as well, shows that there's an underlying and more emotional need here with Ketu in the 4th sign. And again, I don't mean to keep picking on Donald Trump, but he's a good example. If you're emotionally feeling vulnerable or rejected, which is one possibility here with Ketu in the 4th, you want more success. You want to be acknowledged more because you need to make up for that rejection. So that's Leo. Virgo, they're geared towards this direction and purpose in life, 9th house. And Rahu in the 9th house can be a bit tricky because we can sometimes go off track. We can go misalign with our dharma, our purpose, because we need to figure something out for a while. We want to do it our own way, maybe. We don't want to follow the teacher. We don't want to follow the way it's always been done. 9th house Rahu can show that. Or we might want more and more teachers because we want more choice. But it does bring up more meaningful questions, and anyone with Virgo rising moon sign will be definitely on a quest for more meaning. But that also shows that they'll be changing how they need to communicate, because it's the Ketu 3rd sign transit. So siblings could involve in that interaction, or everyday interactions, neighbors, everyone you're dealing with in your local area. How you communicate with all those people and what you're communicating will be very important for Virgo, because there's a lot of changes going on in terms of what they are thinking right now. And the next year and a half is going to go through a lot of change. So it could just mean that they're having to really change the way they approach things and do things and communicate things. Libra, there are some unexpected changes, of course, because it's a 8th house transit, and to be open to unexpected, and not to think of unexpected as a bad thing, that it could be a nice surprise for Libra, because it's Taurus. So it's Rahu and Taurus. So there could be some nice surprises for Libra. But certainly there's a lot of issues around partners' wealth and values. So they're having to balance that with their own. And so Ketu in the 2nd can show like a rejection of their own, or maybe even the loss of their own wealth, and a preference for their partner's wealth. So it's like if if one person loses a job and the other person has to be relied upon, or some kind of situation like that, or they have to pool money together and so on. This will be a big theme for Libra, because just as with Aries, Libra are dealing with finances with this transit, the 2nd and 8th sign. Then Scorpio obviously is going through a lot of changes too, because Ketu is transiting Scorpio. So personal changes for them. So they might overly focus on other people and their interaction with other people. And then that might, they might neglect themselves. If you're focused too much on other people, you're not focused enough on yourself. So it's always about balance with the nodes. So there could be an invisibility or visibility issue going on. Having said that, if there were one sign that deals well with Scorpio or with Ketu, it's Scorpio, because Ketu is said to rule Scorpio. So that's the one caveat there. So there are definitely some personal changes going on, even physical changes like the way they look could be possible there. So it's all about balancing themselves with others and their relationships. Sagittarius, really focusing on day-to-day stuff. Rahu in the sixth, work and health and improving their work routines and health in general. This is all the focus. And of course, that might mean that they need to retreat more. They might need to delve into that Ketu in the 12th, which is a good place for Ketu, and go on more retreats and treat themselves and go on, on some journey in some way. And so that can recharge more than anything, because if the focus is health and work and efficient work and working well, then it's really helpful to balance that with some downtime, which is the 12th sign, and not to ignore the need for retreat and meditation and all of those things. So that's for Sagittarius, rising or moon sign. Then we have Capricorn, a lot of focus on creativity, romance, children, enjoyments. It's fifth sign Rahu. That's quite nice. Should we put it that way? That is quite nice. Again, indulgence could be a problem with Rahu in the fifth in Taurus. So they need to be mindful of that and why they're indulging and what they might be avoiding, which is this side here. And they could be avoiding their own even long-term goals and aspirations. So it's like, if you can't achieve that thing that you've been thinking of in the long term, well, let's just think about what I can enjoy right now and who I can enjoy right now. So there might be some rejection though of friends and groups and associations or any associates in favor of those personal goals with the fifth sign transit of Rahu. So of course, again, balance is necessary here to find balance between both. So for Aquarius rising or moon sign, a lot of focus on home and stability and seeking happiness. Rahu in the fourth can really propel someone into lots of different ways of finding happiness. And of course, one of the issues with Rahu in the fourth is, and as I mentioned earlier, Rahu, abhors being in the moment. It just doesn't exist in the moment. And so happiness is fleeting as well. Happiness is just a state of mind. You're happy one moment and then you're sad another moment. And Rahu in the fourth, seeking happiness, shows that there's a need, obviously, to realize that whatever you're chasing, whatever goal you're chasing, for Aquarius, that happiness is a state of mind. It's fleeting, and that there's a deeper inner sense of joy that is possible in the moment. And that's nothing to do with Rahu, which is always seeking something in the future. Rahu is always about getting something that you haven't got and you want to get it. And so the fact that you haven't got it means that you're unhappy because you haven't got it yet. So this is one of the issues with Rahu in the fourth, and to be mindful of that and how they might reject their responsibilities in the outer world and the changes that are happening in work, and finding that work-life balance would be really important for Aquarius, I feel. And then finally for Pisces, this is all about communicating their heart's desires. And so third house transit of Rahu, all their self-interest will really be highlighted, as well as relationships with everyday people and short travels and their siblings. And but there's definitely something about them having to delve into communicate what is really their burning desire, and being energized by that as well, feeling more energy from that experience, but also a deeper sense of a higher truth, deeper truth and purpose and meaning, because Ketu in the ninth, will really get them to dig deeper and to, when they communicate whatever they're communicating, if it's a deeper truth, if it's a deeper sense of meaning and purpose for them personally, then they'll be more energized to be able to communicate that. And that's why they need to keep that balance and understand, that saying, the tree can only grow as tall as its roots are deep. So if you were for Pisces, rising or moon sign, the deeper they go, the more they'll be able to communicate this new sense of truth that they find. So that's Pisces, rising or moon, and that is it. And that are all, they are all the 12 signs. And just before I leave you, I'll just mention, if you're not familiar with the website, it's timelineastrology.com. My email is info@timelineastrology.com. I put my number there, but I'm not really good at answering that phone. I live in a really quite a rural area and my phone coverage isn't the best. So it's always best to email me. And I do, obviously, these timelines I refer to all the time. I write timelines and articles, I do readings, and I do monthly daily reports for patrons. And so I started doing that maybe a couple of years ago. So I write solely daily, monthly reports for patrons now. And it feels very rewarding to, have patrons. Some of you are here. It's really great to feel like I'm getting something back for making the effort, in my writing. And it's, I think, improved my writing. So you patrons have helped me improve my writing also. But for anyone else who would like to look into that, you can go to the website, it's timelineastrology.com. And thank you for listening.